This is Brian Kemple of Continuum Philosophical Insight, and today we're going to take 15 minutes to talk about bad psychological habits in the time of the coronavirus pandemic, or as the title states, Pandemics and Phantasms. If you want to know more about me, Continuum, or the work I do, links to my site are below. Now, the title of this 15-minute insight might seem a little strange. Everyone knows what a pandemic is. The other word, phantasm, is quite a bit less familiar. It sounds like something having to do with ghosts or horror films, or maybe an early 1990s Batman cartoon, or perhaps suggests the more common word, phantom. Both phantasm and phantom come from the same Greek root, phantasma, meaning appearance, image, or, yes, apparition or specter, but which itself is derived from the verb phantasine, meaning to make visible or to show. Without delving into all the technical details, Plato and Aristotle used the term phantasm to signify not just visual images, but any sensory object which is retained, through which the world is subsequently perceived. Now, correlative to these sensory perceptual images, Aristotle, writing in the 4th century BC, posited a human faculty of phantasia. The scholastics, and specifically Thomas Aquinas, writing in the 13th century, elaborated on this phantasia, positing interior sense or perceptual faculties called the vis imaginativa, vis memorativa, and vis cogitativa. A disciple of Aquinas, John Ponceau, writing some 4 centuries later from the Iberian Peninsula, named these 3 faculties together as the phantasiarii. Now, these faculties and the phantasms they form and retain play an enormous role in the functioning of the human psyche. All of our specifically intellectual operations, that is, operations which concern themselves with universal meanings, with truth and goodness itself, and so on and so forth. All of these specifically intellectual operations depend upon the phantasms which we form. That we are able to discover intelligible meaning at all occurs only because we have the right phantasms rightly disposed, and that we realize actually the understanding of those intelligible meanings occurs only because we have the right phantasms to which those meanings can be applied. If all our phantasms are of bad things, our thinking likely will be too. For instance, if all of our phantasms are overwhelmed by sexuality, we're not likely to be spending our time seeking truth and understanding, but instead we'll find ourselves generally being attuned to the pursuit of sexual pleasures. Likewise, if all our phantasms are of fearful things, if all we hear are the words plague, pestilence, death, pandemic, virus, chaos, suppression, exponential increase, lies, deceit, manipulation, and so on and so forth, our thinking probably isn't going to be very positive in such situations either. So where I'm going with this ultimately should by now probably be fairly obvious. The occurrence of a deadly pandemic is hardly unique in the history of the world. Any globalizing tendency of commerce and travel has, in fact, sooner or later resulted in such a spread. And in the 30 years since the fall of Soviet Russia, globalization has accelerated yet again in a considerable way. As such, the fears about pandemics in 2002 with the SARS-CoV-1 or the H1N1 bird and swine flus in 2004 and 2009, these were legitimate, and now we see them being realized in the 2019-2020 SARS-CoV-2, or COVID-19, or novel coronavirus, or whatever else one might call it. Personally, I've been calling it the Devils Wreath, in no small part because of the phantasmal effect such a name has. It is to be conveyed the drama better by speaking of the Yersinia pestis bubonic plague of the 14th century, or do we not get something else by referencing the Black Death, the pestilence. How we name things, how we depict them not only in terms of information and facts and awareness and scientific nomenclature, but also poetically, artistically, how we place them in a properly human context of understanding. This is important for our understanding not only of what it is, but our understanding of the moment in which we live through it and how we ought to relate to this moment in history. So SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 are such clinical terms. Well, coronavirus is rather nondescript, and moreover to me suggests the weightless Mexican lager. So the name I'm proposing might sound silly and hyperbolic, reminiscent of or even nostalgic for a bygone era of enchantment, an era in which the physical world was touched by the spiritual, and the mechanism of disease was always significant of something more, something higher, something beyond the physical. But maybe, just maybe, that enchantment has a purpose. That is, I am not suggesting that we call it the Devil's Wreath because it is a divine punishment sent in retribution for the excesses of globalized capitalist greed, or as just desserts for consumerism, nor that the virus is somehow an embodiment of demonic evil. The term wreath, in this case, comes from the etymology of corona. That is, approximately in Latin it means crown, but more remotely the original Greek meant garland or wreath, as what was given to victors in the Olympic Games or other such contests. But a wreath is not only an adornment, rather it is also a possible means of constriction, a serious symptom of the current pandemic being that one often has a painful tightness in the chest. Yet at an even more metaphorical level, at this particular moment we are surrounded by this disease. 2 days ago, in fact, the county executive where I live stated, "Act as though the virus is everywhere." It is everywhere, if not physically, psychologically. It has permeated all our phantasms. Outside of one's home, outside of the safe spaces where we shelter, one sees all items and persons under a lens of suspicious inquiry. Are you a vector? Is that door handle teeming with viral particles? Is this package safe to bring inside my home? Should I wear gloves? Do I need a mask? But even inside, in our homes, in our safe places, we have televisions and computers and tablets and smartphones, and all of them, digitally networked, usher the virus into our consciousness continually. I open my social media, Twitter or Facebook, and scrolling for 30 or 45 seconds on each, it seems that literally every post relates in some way to the pandemic. Even the sponsored tweet from KFC advertises contactless delivery. Even the priest offering access to video games is in response to another person asking what will help pass the time while social distancing. Advertising for online courses seems up dramatically. Do we have to wonder why? On the one hand, this sort of totalizing concern, this pervasive involvement of everyone in the same thing, in the same phantasmal world of referential context, is unavoidable. All our lives are, in fact, being impacted by these changes, and so all of our attention cannot help but shift correspondingly. And yet, at the same time, this degree of totalizing shift, while understandable, is yet evidence of our collective lack of virtue. When he describes the ways in which human beings are disposed as a whole, Aristotle distinguishes 6 categories into which we can place human beings, 2 of which are so exceptionally rare and extreme that they don't even count. That is, from highest to lowest, he says persons can be godlike, virtuous, possessing self-restraint, lacking in self-restraint, vicious and bestial. Those who are godlike and bestial are not really human at all. having been gifted or deprived of something to a degree that removes them from ordinary human modalities of existence. But beyond that, within the four ranges that we normally find human beings, into which we can normally place human beings, very few are truly virtuous. Many more are somewhere between possession and a lack of self-restraint. We have it, or we struggle with self-restraint, while quite a few of us are probably vicious, or have tended towards viciousness at times in our life as well. So what we see very clearly in the present is the lack of self-restraint. In fact, I'd say that's really where most people have been for most of history, is somewhere fairly low on the scale of lacking self-restraint. But we all have right now is our minds wrapped up in the Devil's Wreath, unable to escape, unable to move outside of it. That is, our ordinary productivity, our ordinary good habits, our ordinary ability to run through daily life towards determinate and specific goals, it seems to me, shows itself not as the result of our own habituation, our own self-possession, but rather as the result of societal structuring, of extrinsic restraints and motivations. Absent these extrinsic factors, we fall apart. I have to wonder how many people right now, off work, at home, unable to go out and visit friends or bars and restaurants, people who, ironically, often complain of not having enough time to study or read or learn, how many are making good use of this time? Are they binge-watching TV shows, movies, playing video games? Or are they perhaps refreshing their Twitter and Facebook feeds often, every few minutes, every 20, 15 minutes, looking for the latest news, the latest unfolding event, the latest outrage? If they're seeking out things to read, books, learning, projects, is this being done wholeheartedly, intentionally, with focus and conviction? Or is it simply as an attempt to distract oneself with things other than the news, other than the enclosing circle of the wreath? Are their minds, our minds, still phantasmally overrun, continually overrun by the great stereopticon's coverage, never-ending coverage of the wreath's spread? What good are we doing for ourselves by absorption in this phantasmal world of the Devil's Wreath? Are we hindering our minds, our learning, our development, our pursuit of virtue? Are we tending towards a vicious obsessiveness? Are we being prudent? Are we lacking in all conviction? There is a certain irony here, of course, that I am chastising everyone for thinking obsessively about the pandemic, for surrendering their phantasmal presentative ordination to it, by myself talking about it. But as I did say above, to some extent it is unavoidable. When it is everywhere we look, we cannot help but think about it. But perhaps I can conclude here with a final exhortation, namely that we perhaps ought to start looking somewhere else. Thank you for listening, and I welcome any and all thoughtful comments. If you found this video helpful or insightful, or at least worth listening to, please check out some of the links below and maybe consider supporting my work. Thank you.